Welcome to the Super Debate podcast. I'm John Connor, founder and CEO of SuperDebate. Today's guest is John Hines, national champion debate coach, NSF-funded researcher, and CEO of DebaterHub, an AI-powered platform that's reimagining how debate is taught in schools across the country. John has spent over 20 years in debate education. He pioneered paperless debating, led students to national championships, and is now building technology to bring debate-centered education to all universities. In this conversation, we get into his journey from the classroom to the startup world, why debate is the most important skill we can teach in the age of AI, where he thinks artificial intelligence is taking academia, and what happens if we get it wrong. This is one of the most important conversations I've ever had on the topic of debate, and I know you will enjoy it. Yeah, so I'm here with John Hines. John, it's great to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thrilled to be here and having this discussion with you, John.
Cool. So to jump right in, I already mentioned in the intro, you're a championship debate coach. One thing I think to start off with is just like, what's your background in debate? How did you get involved? And, kind of why do you still do it?
Yeah, I'm what we might call a lifer in the debate community. I was a first generation college student. College wasn't really a thing my family talked about, but debate was something that always fascinated me as a kid. Like I got into it in eighth grade English class. And I still remember the what really hooked me is we had these kind of informal debates, and the topic that I drew was something absurd, like students should be required to shave their heads or just like some really silly debate. But I won the debate, and just became fascinated with the power of argument. And eventually became like a high school state champion in Texas and national level debater in college. And after that, I attempted to go into the corporate world and take a corporate job. It just didn't feel right. And was offered a job coaching debate in college. And I've never really left the community. I've coached high school debaters, college debaters, numerous national champions, and I've just always felt that it was the best way to learn and engage with a topic. I was always way more interested in what was happening in my debates, and what I was learning from debate than what I was learning in my classrooms as a student. And then as a teacher, I've learned that turning assignments into debates gets a much higher level of engagement from the students. And the thing that I really love about it is it puts them in control of the classroom. The thing that I think is most powerful about debate, from an educational perspective, is it reverses the power relationship in the classroom. The students are the ones up front talking, and dictating the tempo and the content, and the teacher is in the back room, at the back of the room, listening, and giving feedback. And I really think and we can obviously go into this more later, but I think it's the most powerful form of education humanity has ever invented.
Yeah, and so you jumped ahead of me there. My next question was going to be about Debater Hub and kind of where you got the idea from and what's motivating that. So I think you just kind of outlined the motivation, the underlying ethos, pretty well for Debater Hub. And why don't you tell us what is Debater Hub and what is it trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so the goal of Debater Hub is to bring debate back to the center of our educational landscape. We started a little over 4 years ago, even pre-Chat GPT. My partner and I got together. We're both former debaters, actually from the same high school debate program, about a decade apart, and decided that we both felt debate was probably the most important thing we did when we were in school. But as an activity, it's an after school club activity, as it manifests now, and it primarily exists as something that elite private schools and wealthy suburban schools get to do, with some rare exceptions. We really felt like more people deserve to have access to debate, as an opportunity to learn. And so initially, it began with we were going to try to figure out how to create tools to lower the barriers to entry to competitive after school debate. But the more we looked at it, we realized, and the more research I did, we realized that the real mission should be debate across the curriculum, or that debate should be happening in every classroom. And that's really the actual history of debate, in America in particular. If you look at the early stages of American colonial chartered colleges, debate was the primary mode of instruction and assessment. Harvard college students in the 1700s had to debate multiple times a week as an assessment. Twice a year, they would host public debates to demonstrate the value of the programming that was happening in the school. And so that's really the mission of DebaterHub, is to bring debate back to the center of education. Partly what we've started to do with that is to try to leverage AI tools to facilitate that, because one of the biggest barriers to access to debate is the lack of experienced teachers and practitioners who understand the activity. And there's a lot of intimidation around debating. And so, kind of our central question as a team is what type of tools can we build to make educators and practitioners feel more comfortable introducing debates into their classrooms? And also, how can we make students feel more prepared for those debates when they're asked to debate as an assignment or a graded assignment in a class?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're focused on a solution. We're both, as we were just talking about, like focus on solutions that really um, kind of co-productively aim to, change culture, but
Hmm.
also require the culture to change in order for it to really be successful, right?
Yep.
I'm trying to develop like debate clubs at scale,
Yeah.
right? I want to
Yeah.
build tournaments, and so that's a lot more than just like build a club here or there. Like there needs to be kind of like a cultural flywheel. And
Yep.
like we were just talking about similarly with like, it's not your goal to just have one or two schools, engage in more debate. You want to build something that's scalable, that
Yep.
can really be foundational. It sounds like in anyone's education, right? And certainly
Yeah.
in education that's oriented towards being elite, in whatever domain you're in, right, is to get into requires the rigor of debate. So, these are the solutions, and I really love focusing on that lens. But you got a little bit into the history. I think in order to understand what it's going to take to get those flywheels going, to change the culture and to change the infrastructure of really our education in America, we have to go back to like, how did we lose that, right? Because you just said that
Yeah.
this is essential to our country's history and founding and early education in America at the elite level, maybe at every level.
Yeah.
And so what happened to get
Yeah.
us to this point in modern society where, of course, we have all the technology, we have all the institutions now that are very powerful of education, and yet, we've really lost these fundamental skills.
Yeah, so there's a couple of turning points, and this is a really important history, because I firmly believe we do not have a Declaration of Independence. We do not have a constitution. If it weren't for the fact that the founding fathers were debating in their classrooms, and they came to understand through this process of debate that we don't need a king telling us what to do. We can have deliberative discussions and disagreements amongst each other, and figure out the best path forward with a scientifically driven, deliberative, evidence-based argumentation. That's the foundation of our constitutional principles in the United States. But we've definitely lost that over time, and that's actually was part of the motivation when we got together 4 years ago. Is we became concerned with the state of discourse, democratic discourse, primarily in America, but it's also a worldwide problem, and also the state of education, because we don't think our students are getting the skills we need. And those two things are connected. And here's why. Yeah, in the colonial chartered colleges in the 1700s, we did debate as assessment. In fact, the classical educational model has three primary assessment modalities. Those are recitations, disputations, and declamations. So recitations would be the teacher asks you directly, what did you read, and you need to be able to recite, verbatim what this text was, or you need to demonstrate content mastery that you know the knowledge. Declamations would be, okay, now deliver a speech, and communicate to an audience that you understand that. And then disputations would literally be debates, where you would have a shared topic, you would have an opponent, you would be randomly assigned a side, you would have to defend that side, and then the tutor or the teacher in the back of the classroom would decide who won the debate and give some feedback. In the early 1800s, we started realizing that we wanted to give everybody education, right? The idea of universal education is something that is fairly early on in American education systems. But the problem became that debate as an instructional and assessment modality was not scalable. All right. And so we went from having these classrooms that were dialogue, debate, deliberation driven to classrooms that were lecture driven. Because they were more efficient and more utilitarian, right? So the students were set up in rows, told to be quiet, instructed to just listen and take in information, and we essentially got rid of declamations and disputations and went just to recitations as the only form of assessment, and that became the instructional modality. And the reason for that was because we could teach more people at scale. That problem became compounded later on when we started to look at, okay, we want these agricultural colleges, we want these industrial colleges as part of the Industrial Revolution. How do we do that? And how do we assess what's happening? And how do we assess at scale? And in some of my scholarship, I've written about a debate between John Dewey and Edward Thorndike, which are two kind of major figures in American educational history. And the simple explanation of the debate is John Dewey argued that the purpose of education was to build democratic citizenship. And he was a huge advocate of debate. I think he was the president of the University of Chicago, and you can still see his imprint on the way University of Chicago looks for their students and the way they instruct their students. It's still a very dialogue and debate driven kind of curriculum at that university. Edward Thorndike is the kind of the early pioneer of what we would call psychometrics in education, which is his advocacy was that we need objective and scalable measures of accomplishments. And so that's where we get our standardized testing regime in the United States. That's the history of standardized testing, is the arguments of Edward Thorndike that we need systematized, universalized, objective, scalable measures of what students of learning our students are learning. So that means that we kind of only valued educational practices that could be objective, that scalable, that we could mark on a multiple choice test. And that worked really well for a while, right? We had amazing in the Industrial Revolution. America became the predominant country in the world because of this educational system. The problem we encounter now is that also kind of created a system where we only valued computational knowledge and not deliberative knowledge or deliberative skills or communication skills. And that's no longer what our students need. We're no longer, training factory workers and farm workers. We are now in a knowledge economy where we need to train thinkers and communicators. And our education system is not built for that anymore. We no longer know how to assess those skills. And so societally, we've also now invented this amazing AI technology that can master all those tests. And there's a major crisis going on where the students are now looking around like, why do we need to learn any of this thing when I can just have ChatGPT write this for me or take this test for me? So there's a major assessment crisis going on in definitely American schools, but I would argue this is something that's universal all over the place. And we think the solution is a return to debate. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great stuff in there, but one thing I really want to highlight is I think you did a really beautiful job in clarifying for me. Let's say we had talked before about the test aspect and how essentially you can rig the current system. AI is too powerful; they're not going to be able to stop it. It's going to be in everyone's contact lenses. You know what I mean? Even
Yep.
right now, there's an immediate crisis, but it's only going to get worse. So that made sense to me intuitively, but the way you map it out in terms of, the system that was developed around computational skills, I think what you do there is you take an interesting concept and a concept that I can vibe with in terms of where things are going, and you make it a matter almost like of historical dialectic, right? Like this is literally the unfolding of history. Like there's an undeniable problem, and you take away the subjectivity of like, well, they're teaching social emotional learning. They're doing this, they're doing that with the school systems. Like there's all these different things that can be criticized or moved around. But what you're talking about is much more fundamental, right? What you're talking about is the schema for the system and how it's like there's a thing that's already happened, right? It's not in the future. AI is
Oh, it's
already
happening
powerful
now.
enough to have broken. all of our best systems of kind of like organizing the meritocracy that we all exist in America. And so, what you're talking about isn't just like, hey, here's a curriculum that's useful. We think it'll be good for students and they'll score well on tests, right? What you're talking about, in my reading of it, is more fundamentally our society is in an immediate crisis, and we need to immediately turn this ship towards a certain mode of educational engagement, um, and kind of really restructure the way we think about education from the ground up. That's really ultimately my takeaway. It's presented as like, debate in the curriculum, debate across the curriculum, but there's something very, very fundamental there that I think you're tapping into.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just all you need to do is look at the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report that came out at the beginning of 2025, where they
Yeah.
list these are the 10 essential skills. And they surveyed, thousands of employers, all the major industries, and like 8 out of those 10 skills are not things you can easily test in a computational knowledge assessment system. But they are
Right.
things that you build and assess in a dialogue, deliberation, and debate-based educational system. So it's not just like it would be nice if we were debating and teaching debate and learning how to debate in classrooms. It is essential for the future of our economy.
Yeah, no, I really love that framing, and I mean that got me fired up. I believe in what I'm doing about 5% more because of that additional context you gave me. I think that's really motivating. So kind of that gets me into like the theory makes sense, the history makes sense, the solution makes sense to me. Where are you at in the building, and kind of what are your goals for 2026? Where do you want to have this by the end of the year?
So we're modest in our goal for the end of 2026. Our goal is to literally build a Canvas app, right? Canvas is the primary learning management system that exists in most universities and K to 12 spaces. And the goal is to make it as simple as possible for teachers to start to begin this transition. And so the goal is a simple Canvas app that facilitates the transition of assignments away from essays towards debates and dialogues, and to really easily scaffold that for instructors. There's a big challenge here. Like, I can talk about how obvious it is to me that we need to completely change the way we do education. But education as an
Of course,
establishment,
debate guy wants more debate, right? Yeah.
right? But I mean, education itself is
He's just trying to
fundamentally
sell you more debate.
right.
Right.
Education is fundamentally one of the most conservative forces in society. If you look at like what the purpose of education is, it's to teach about what we've done in the past and try to project that past into the future. And so it's really hard to change education. In fact, there's a quote circulating out there that it's probably easier to land humans on Mars than it is to fix the American education system. So there's a massive challenge here for us. But we have done a lot of work over the past couple of years. We spent last year doing hundreds of customer discovery interviews where we've talked to college presidents and deans and department chairs and professors and students and parents, and to really try to get a better understanding of what the actual needs are, and in particular what the barriers to change would be. And we discovered that there's a couple of major barriers to the implementation of this, and one is teachers are already just completely overburdened and overwhelmed. And the last thing teachers want is a new technology tool in their classroom that they need to learn, or a new login they need to remember, and the other thing that happens is like it seems like every year, teachers come into their, beginning of year meetings and professional development meetings, and they're like, here's the new thing we're going to try this year. And they barely try it for a year and then it flames out and then flails. So this is obviously a longer horizon project than something that we can just like, you know, hyperscale in 6 months and completely change education. It's just fundamentally a conservative institution, and even just the process of getting your technology into a university, and making sure it's safe and reliable, and privacy concerns and data concerns and all that is a major challenge. So our goal for the end of the year is to be able to have a safe, reliable, university approved technology platform that's really easy for teachers to just literally click a button and create a debate. And then once we've accomplished that, the start of 2027, we're going to start doing efficacy trials and pilots where, for the teachers, we're really going to have to demonstrate to them this works and this improves learning outcomes. Because if we can't demonstrate that this will actually materially improve learning outcomes, teachers aren't going to be interested in this. And I think we can't just like try to run over the teachers or tell the teachers what to do. We have to get buy-in from the faculty. And so that's a longer time horizon project. So we've learned we have to be patient with what we're doing, and that we have to do a lot of listening, and to all the various different stakeholders at play. And that's fundamentally why education is so challenging to change, because everybody has a stake in our educational system. And because you have so many stakeholders with so many different perspectives and so many different levers of power, you really have to be thoughtful about how you move in that space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm really glad you unpacked kind of all the kind of institutional complexity, right? I think especially in the startup world, you tend to think about like move fast, break things. How do you
Right.
launch? How do you like, this and that. And yeah, as we talked about before, there's angles of that might be useful, right? Some experiments to run, or just get it in front of some people just to gather some data. But fundamentally, with a goal as ambitious as yours in terms of how you imagine this program to relate to academia, at a broadest scale, there's no avoiding doing the foundational work in that system, right?
Yeah.
If you want to engage that system, then you got to kind of play on those terms. And yeah, that's really great that you guys have that all mapped out, right? And you understand it's a game that you understand how to play,
Yeah.
and hopefully how to win.
And I mean, it
Um,
helps that I've been a teacher my entire life, right?
right.
And that's, I'm always honest with people when I talk to them. I'm not a tech CEO who wants to change education. I'm a teacher who wants to
Yeah.
change education, and I've leaned into technology as the way to do that. And so I'm an insider, as opposed to an outsider trying to come and change it. But there's a lot of institutional forces that, yeah, you can't be the typical go fast and break things startup, and you can't go fast and break education. Well, first of all, it's already broken, but you certainly can't go fast, and just like worry about the consequences later. When you're dealing with people's education, they're spending hundreds of thousands, the families are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this, and they expect outcomes, right? They're there because they want to improve their lives. They want to create better educational opportunities as they move further down the road in their education. They want to create better employment opportunities, and those are really important things that we can't be brash and brazen with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess, it might be a while before we see this like nationwide, but, I think many people, I imagine many teachers, but certainly many people I know and am aware of are paying attention to what you're talking about when it comes to the education system. We know there are these problems. There's the AI aspect, there's looking at the market, there's the fact that like, you used to have Stanford grads get universal job offers after graduation, and that's no longer the case, right? We're
Yeah.
seeing this. That's one example. We're seeing this across, the college world. It seems like people are not prepared for the workplace, and the workplace is responding in kind, right? By not accepting them, and so there is the need for some fast solutions, even though we don't want to break things. So that's a difficult thing to balance in terms of narrative, and in terms of
Yeah.
a number of aspects. But sorry, my main point was just that teachers are listening to this, educators are listening to this, they're bought into what you're saying. How can they start to integrate debate into their curriculum today? What
Yeah.
would be your best advice for, just how do I solve this problem with what I have today and where I'm at?
Yeah, and I'll point out that like not only are educators interested, and as soon as I start like laying this out, they're like, "Yeah, you're right." Even like anti-AI people, right? Like when I did all these interviews, and I would tell them, "Hey, I have a grant from the National Science Foundation, and we're doing research on how to implement this." So many teachers would be like, "Well, I'm really anti-AI, but I'm willing to have this conversation with you." And by the end of the conversation, they'd be like, "Well, how do I sign up for a pilot?" Right? And
Yeah.
it happen like within an hour long, like they would go from, well, I'm anti-AI and you're doing AI things to when can I get into a pilot? And how do we set up the pilot? And so it's there. The understanding's there, and we're also have debate itself is having a great cultural moment. If you look at just across the internet, how many people are trying to engage in long form argument and long form discussion. I know I wouldn't say like all versions of debate that we're seeing out there in society are necessarily good or productive because we've failed at teaching people how to debate properly as a society. But I would say for a teacher who wants to implement debate in their classroom is don't wait for me. They should just get started. Obviously, we're building and we're trying to get there, but there's no reason to wait for these tools to come into place before you start doing debate in your classroom. There's plenty of resources out there. There's a movement called Debate Across the Curriculum. And if teachers want to Google Debate Across the Curriculum, they can find some beginning resources for how to start implementing debates in their classroom. And just start doing low stakes conversations and debates. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the best possible version. I mean, one of the things that we really lean into when we start talking about debate across the curriculum or debate as a learning modality is the importance of productive failure, that we learn to take risks and to fail and to improve from those failures. And so be willing to implement debates in your classroom and fail. I think that teachers just need to recognize that while it's really hard to create space in your curriculum and you feel like you're overwhelmed with all the other things you have to accomplish, that you'll start to learn once you start implementing debates in your classroom that you're going to get much deeper engagement from your students, and their learning outcomes will actually be improved if you do that. So you just got to be willing to take the risk. And of course, feel free to reach out to DebaterHub and sign up for a pilot. We'd love to sign students up, teachers up, in college classrooms, and we'd even be willing to set up some high school classrooms as well to start trying to implement some of the tools we've built already.
Awesome. That's great. So, I mean, you guys are early stage, but you've been working on this for a long time.
Yeah.
You've put a lot into this, into your understanding of obviously debate in this context, the technology solution, understanding of like the classroom requirements and everything. And I just want to make sure I understand this. Right now, for the pilot, you would be working with teachers and classrooms, maybe schools for free. Is that right?
Yeah, right now our pilots are free.
Wow.
We've been funded by the National
Yeah.
Science Foundation that helped us do a lot of our fundamental like model development for the AI tools that we've built. We've received grants from Amazon Web Services as well to develop this technology. And so right now we're offering free pilots for our partner schools, high school, primarily we're looking for our high schools and college classes that are looking to implement this technology. And yeah, it's a free pilot. And really what we're trying to do is to understand the specific needs of the teachers and the students, and to really dial in the assessment rubrics. Or, if you remember what I was talking about with the Dewey v. Thorndike debate, the real challenge here is to create objective, scalable measures of these dialogical skills, right? The skills of being able to communicate and disputate and dialogue across disagreement. Those skills are measurable and can be objectively measured. If you look at the competitive debate community, we've been assessing these skills and evaluating these skills in reasonably objective frames for quite some time now. We just haven't extracted those measures from the competitive debate community and translated them into rubrics that are scalable. And that's really what we now need to do with these pilots is to make sure that the measures, the rubrics, the scales that we are giving to people to say, yes, you've developed the skill, or here's where you are on the metrics for how far along you are on the skills. That's what we need to start developing, and that only happens if we have partners, research partners, who are willing to help us work through that process.
Got it. That's great. I think that is, not to show too hard or anything, but that's an incredible value. It's an incredible offer for any educator.
Yep.
This isn't like a niche thing as we've kind of gone over. It applies. That's the whole point across the curriculum. And yeah, I think that's just super exciting. I'm definitely going to make sure all the teachers that I know are aware of this. Because again, it's clearly if not the future, it's a solution that needs to be in the market that can solve very clear problems that I think any teacher would agree exist. I think anybody in American society would agree exist, right? I think that's the wonderful angle from the position that you're in right now is this is all very real, and we all know these issues are real. We
Yeah,
experience it every day on every front, you know?
I've yet to encounter a teacher that's like, "Oh, that's a terrible idea," right?
Right,
They'll either say the AI scares me, the AI part of it, because we are implementing AI tools into it to facilitate things.
right,
So some teachers will be like, "Well, that AI part kind of scares me," or they'll say, "Oh, the debate part kind of scares me."
right.
Um,
Yeah, I was
that's
wondering about that.
that because it implies giving up a little bit of power in the classroom, right? Like I said,
Right.
like at the beginning, that debate fundamentally shifts the power relationship in the classroom, and it gives the students a lot more control over what's happening. And so teachers do have a little bit of a fear of like, okay, well, this is going to impact my classroom management. Like I'm going to lose control of the classroom. And honestly, you don't. Because the students become suddenly much more invested in their own education. But you have to think about the power dynamics in the classroom a little bit differently. You are now a standards setter and a coach as opposed to a subject area expert, right?
Mhm.
For teachers for a long time have just thought of their role as a subject area expert that just has to download knowledge to students and then assess whether students have attained that knowledge. We no longer need that teaching modality. We no longer need subject area experts as our instructors. We need dialogue coaches and disputation mentors and somebody who's going to create a safe and healthy environment for the students to experiment with those ideas and then give them reliable feedback.
Yeah, I really love the power dynamic focus. I think from a number of different perspectives, but like one that comes to me is like, you know, it is scary. And, it's scary because of the reasons that you mentioned when it comes to power, but also there's a fundamental, like, I think, if I imagine you were the debatey type with teachers in classrooms, right? And that might be how you got into debate. I think that's how, in one way or another, pretty much everyone in debate at some point was like a debatey kid in a classroom. And that's like the biggest single pipeline, right? Is like from debatey kid to debater pipeline. Eventually teachers push you, towards that because you're driving them nuts.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
in a world in which we're centering debate, the teacher really has to be for lack of a better phrase, master debater, right? To command
Yep.
respect of the room,
Yep.
I mean, to be more broadly, to command respect of society, right? You can't have people educating the youth that don't have a certain degree of mastery in that craft. And if the craft we're talking about is something that becomes more universalizable, which I think a lot of both our goals, our perspectives on this agree with other people that we know that are entrepreneurs in debate agree with this, right? Like these are values that are fundamental and they're not something that you can ignore in any aspect of our society, right? The ability to just, let's just say, navigate argumentation most generally, right? Whether
Yep.
you're, trying to win a debate or trying to diffuse one or trying to get something done in the world with your words, right? Relationships, whatever. They're kind of the same atomic building blocks. So when it comes to vision, there's one thing I want to get to. I know it's a really difficult question to answer, but I think it's so important to like motivate people and to also inspire people towards wanting to participate in these things, wanting to support them, believing that we can have a better education system, right? Which I think is half the battle. Um, what do you think the world looks like? What do you think America looks like? Our society, our culture, in a world in which debate across the curriculum, and specifically, let's just say your solution, is something that's gone fully mainstream, and we have debate at the center of our education system and our expectations of academic performance.
Yeah. Well, so first, I'll step back and this like fear of teachers and like the debatey kids, right?
Yeah,
I want to clarify that when I'm talking about debate, I'm not necessarily talking about like try to like one up my verbal opponent and intimidate and zinger them, right?
sure.
Right. Like so. First of all, like our first one of our other challenges is to educate people that when we talk about debate in type in like a classroom sense and a more classical sense, we should think of it as a process of interrogating ideas. right?
Mhm.
That the goal in debate is not to belittle or demean my opponent, which there are certain versions of debate that have become popular that I think are more rage bait than debate.
Yeah.
That is not what we are describing, right? We are not describing this verbal sparring where you're just trying to zing your opponent and belittle your opponent. We're talking about a process of reasoned interrogation of ideas with evidentiary foundations. Okay. I think a society that has that as a foundational element of education becomes a much more stable democracy for one, right? And that kind of returns back to this early impetus of like what are we doing, right? And why can't we as a society disagree with each other productively right now, right? We're hyper polarized as a society, and we could have a whole other podcast discussion about why that is and what's going on there. But from my perspective, an essential component of that is learning the process of deliberative disagreement with evidentiary foundations and respect for the other side, and our willingness to listen to each other. Like an essential component of debate is active listening and understanding of what the other side is saying. I think that this is something we have to do because if you look at the future of the job market and where our economy's shifting, that's where the jobs are going to be, for one, right? As AI reorganizes how we shuffle information and store information as a society. The people who know how to manage understanding, manage disagreement, and have productive dialogue across disagreement are going to be the people with the valuable skills that we need to put in positions of importance. But then that ripples out through society, where we can have a more reasoned disagreement about what's the proper direction for our country, or our business, right? Like this is things that should be happening in boardrooms as well. When a company is trying to decide, make a major decision about an initiative they're going to do, they need reasoned deliberative debate to make decisions. And so I think ultimately we create a more productive and healthy society because we learn how to deliberate, disagree. And I think fundamentally, like even more radical changes are coming to our educational system. I think that we're going to see, in the coming decades, the breakdown of the majors system. um, I think that we're going to see a breakdown where we no longer necessarily need 4-year degrees. I think that there are much more radical, fundamental changes to the overall educational architecture that are coming. Now, I can't predict exactly where those are going, but I can identify the tectonic shifts as they're emerging. That if you know how to pay attention, you can see that these things are coming. For instance, some of the interviews that we had to do, so we conducted hundreds of interviews as part of our National Science Foundation funded research last year. And we went into that research thinking that the fundamental problem that universities were encountering was AI cheating, and that they were really concerned about AI cheating. And we were like, oh, well, we can solve your essay cheating problem by making people debate. That was at best a tertiary concern for them. The real primary concerns that are facing universities in particular right now in America is one, that they're having trouble demonstrating the value of the degree itself. We would label this the return on investment crisis within higher ed. That the average cost of obtaining a college degree or a bachelor's degree is rapidly equaling the value you would get out of it, right? So you're going to spend as much on that degree as the lifetime value of that degree. At that point, it makes it really hard for a family to justify spending, $1 million on a college education when it's only going to improve your lifetime potential earnings by $1 million. That's a massive crisis that's happening in education. And, it's funny because, like, I would say probably, this crisis has been emerging for a number of years now. You would look at that data and go, well, at least I could get a computer science degree and I'll be okay. But like you alluded to earlier, like Stanford computer science grads are having trouble getting jobs, right? And when Stanford computer science grads are having trouble getting jobs, you know that there's a fundamental shift that needs to happen in our education system. And the other major problem that's confronting universities is the demographic cliff crisis. That the birth rate in the United States is declining rapidly, and we are what we would call below replacement rate in our birth rate, meaning your average couple is having less than two kids. And so the way our university system financially is structured is it's driven by enrollment, right? The enrollment primarily pays for the cost of the university. Well, costs are expanding every year, expenses are expanding every year. Your faculty want raises every year, your administrators want raises every year, but they're encountering declining enrollment. So they have a dual crisis right now in the higher education system of declining enrollment numbers and the value of the degrees themselves are hard to demonstrate. So a fundamental massive realignment of education is coming, is due. Exactly what it looks like on the other side, it's hard for me to project, but I do think what we're doing at DebaterHub is an essential component of how to think forward. And what are we doing? How do we build valuable skills, demonstrate the value of those skills, and entice students to come to this university knowing that they're going to develop skills that they will find value from when they leave the university.
Got it. Now, John, you have done an incredible job this entire conversation at making everything very grounded and pragmatic and material, and logical and clear. And I really appreciate that. When it comes to the vision of like how will society be different when this is kind of adopted at scale. I think all of that makes perfect sense and it's fantastic. I would like to take it a little bit further though, right? Because and maybe this isn't your focus right now as a startup founder, which might make complete sense, right? But where I get really excited about what you're doing, and of course, by extension, what I'm doing as well with Super Debate, is like, what does humanity look like when we center debate, right? I mean, humanity, American culture, let's just say this spills over, right? But we could talk about just America. That's the focus of the conversation. And I think, your short-term focus with institutions is and it's a more unified culture. We can talk about changing the college education system here. So American culture, adopting debate right at the academic level and centering it, means that it's going to spill over to a lot of other areas of society, right? And I believe once this happens, it's weird. On the one hand, I don't want to sound too pie in the sky, but at the same time, it's just what makes sense is I think we live in a more open society, a
Yep.
more virtuous society, a more clear thinking society, a society that can coordinate better, accomplish goals better, resolve problems better, find
Yep.
solutions better to problems internally and externally for our country, right? And to
Yep.
me, that's an undeniable, just kind of bedrock truth almost, because that's what debate is,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
It's the center of it.
that's the shining city on the hill, right?
That's correct.
Like that
Yeah.
that is the initial promise of American democracy, right? That is and that's founded in the golden age of the Greeks, right?
Yeah.
And if you go back and read, Aristotle and Plato, if you actually read their writing was written as debates and dialogues, right?
Mhm.
And it was dialogues and debates and disputations is literally what they were writing. And so how do we get to that golden age that everybody wants to return to or get to? Well, you have to do the things that made the golden age vision possible. And the things that made that golden age vision possible was teaching our children how to dialogue, debate, dispute productively, right? And it's not about destroying my opponent. It's about listening to, understanding my opponent, and then coming to a better solution collectively. Because, yeah, then the opportunities are limitless at that point, right? And that's kind of like the exciting promise of AI, right? And I know people are now kind of rolling their eyes every time somebody's like, oh, yeah, it's going to solve all our problems. We will have no problems once we have AI. I don't think it's that simple. I think that we need to learn how to disagree with each other productively, and talk to each other productively. And then once we do that, there are no problems humanity can't solve because nothing is impossible when we work together, as a society or as a world. Humanity is capable of amazing things, but those amazing things always tend to come out of societies or organizations that know how to dialogue, dispute, debate, disagree, without destroying everyone around them.
Yep. That makes perfect sense. And I think you touched on this in a number of different places during this conversation. But I really want to get it dialed in, because I think it's one of the most important questions our society is facing right now. People are very afraid of, let's just say, free speech, different sides expressing their perspectives.
Yep.
Um, Certainly more now than in any other time that I've been alive. Everyone says polarization, but even more than polarization, it's like ideological funnels, right? Where all the media that you're consuming is reinforcing algorithmically the things you already believe, which isn't just a matter of like, well, I think this is true versus I think this is true. What's embedded in all of that media is, as you used the phrase earlier, rage bait, right? Where the way to get most people interested in your content is to turn the other side into enemies. And so, it's more than just, people are believing different things, but they're viewing each other as enemies. And the fundamental thing I want to hear your thought on is, what do you tell people who like won't debate or won't see the other side or don't think that there's anything there? What's your message for people that are so dug in, that they don't even think about debating, right? Because debate requires you to engage. It requires you to see the other side. And if you're not willing to do that, it's really hard to debate.
I think fundamentally humans crave connection, and humans want to be understood. And I think debate has an image problem right now.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's that people don't want to debate. I think they have a pejorative idea about what debate is. And so I think step one for folks like that is we have an image problem we have to create as a community of debaters. That debate is a process of empathy building. And I don't know anybody who doesn't want to be listened to and understood,
Hmm.
like period. Like that's just like fundamental to the human condition. Is we want to connect with people. We want to be heard by people. We want to be understood by people. And so, I've got family members that I have massive political disagreements with, substantial political disagreements with, right? And this is a kind of a trend in American society right now where people are cutting off their loved ones because they disagree with
Hmm.
them politically, right? And a major problem, because not only have we become polarized generally as a society, but even families are becoming polarized. We're cutting each other off because we don't know how to empathize and listen to each other. And so, what do I say to the people who don't want to debate? I would probably ask them, do you want friends? Do you want connections? Do you want to be heard? Then we all need to learn how to listen to each other, and then respond appropriately. Now, I do understand some people, like some people I've worked with are like, I don't like the switch side component of debate, right? Where
Yeah.
I'm forced to advocate for something I don't necessarily agree with. I have a couple answers for them. One is I would say I view it as kind of a no risk proposition when you're asked to defend a position you don't necessarily agree with, because either you deepen your understanding by having to advocate for your opponent's position. You will either deepen your understanding of your own position and have an even more firmly grounded, rational justification and defense for your belief, or you'll learn you're wrong, and will open your understanding and become a little more empathetic, and expand your understanding of the world around you. And even if you still after that are like, well, no, I have like a moral objection to arguing for the other side, that I don't think it is moral to argue for the other side. You still, if you want to be successful in a debate, need to learn to listen and understand, um, because it's a dialectical process of trying to reach an understanding or conclusion. Because the only other alternative is war, perpetual war, right? Like it's either war forever or learning how to listen and empathize and understand, and striving together. It's a struggle, right? Democracy is a struggle. It is a conflict, but it is the best form of conflict because we've come up with a way to solve our problems as a society without killing each other or just arbitrarily designating a king and letting that king tell us what to do and kill us whenever that king wants us to do. That it may not be perfect, but it's the best solution we have.
Wow, that is a great place to wrap this up, and you really took it kind of all the way there. Again, I really wanted the vision to come out at the cultural level, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. So I really appreciated that framing. Um, Cool. So I guess one last thing before we wrap up would just be, we talked about, how teachers can start to do this and how they can get in touch with you and pilot programs and things like that. But more generally, if people hear this, they feel inspired, whether the teachers or not teachers. What are the things that you need support in, and how can people support your work and kind of the success of this whole project? Your company obviously has a specific entity, but just this kind of movement in general.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited by the debate movement that's happening right now. If you look around, there's all kinds of examples of debate that are starting to happen. So first, I would encourage other people who are interested in debate that we as a community of debaters and people who are trying to spread debate, that we stop arguing with each other about what the best form of debate is, and just all agree that everybody should be debating, and just trying to make debate as healthy and productive as possible for more people to do that. For me, aside from like, well, a funder would be nice, right? Like somebody who's willing to give us a little money to help the company grow. Um, Research is important right now. Like I said, especially in an educational endeavor, that we need to be able to demonstrate what we're doing works. And so we're building a team here at DebaterHub of vast variety of researchers, data scientists, machine learning researchers, NLP researchers, educational impact researchers, including people who are researching like how do we make sure everybody benefits from this equally as opposed to just one group, right? So we're building a wide coalition of researchers who are interested in doing this. And we need, because it's a movement, and we need teachers who are willing to do this, students who want to start clubs in their schools who want to do this, that this is not something that just like one individual is going to accomplish or one company is going to accomplish. This is definitely a movement that has to emerge, if it's really going to stick. And so I say just the thing that we need the most right now is for people to engage, and for us all to start looking for ways to collaborate together and work together, as opposed to kind of look at it as like it's either your format or my format, or it's only this debate that is acceptable. I really think that we, first of all, as a community of debaters, need to start collaborating more effectively with each other, and then the community of educators need to get involved as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John Hines. It is Debater Hub. You're doing amazing work, and I'm excited to support any way that I can. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
having this chat with me.
Thank you so much, John. I enjoyed it.